So we've hit the top of the hour, friends. So I think we'll begin, and I know that others will join us as we move along. But let me welcome you. It's great to have you with us. My name is Stephen Fetter, and I manage the United Learning Program for the General Counsel Office. And just delighted to be able to be the host of the party tonight, and to have a chance to celebrate this new book that Taylor has pulled together and that so many different people have contributed to. It is. It was a joy to read, and I'm looking forward to having some conversation with Taylor in just a few minutes about what's in it, and hoping that maybe we can whet your appetite a bit so that you will enjoy it as much as I did. As we gather, I think it's always important to acknowledge where we are and where we're sitting. And before we turned the recording on, many of you were writing to the chat already and naming the place where you come from, and some of you were anticipating me and naming also the treaty that binds you. But for all of us now, I'd like to invite you to just take a moment to think about the land you're sitting on. Think about all the people who have been nurtured by that particular piece of land, all those people who have cared for it and been stewards of it for thousands of years. Think about the agreements that my ancestors and others made with those first stewards of this land. And name the agreements and the treaties that bind you where you are. We'll just take a few moments in silence to watch those come in. I'm not going to try to read them on the chat. We just let it kind of flow over us. I always find it moving to read all the names, to realize how many different nations were here and are here. Realize how many people and how many histories and how many connections and treaties are a part of our history and a part of our present. And it's always heartening for me to realize how much we know now. When we first started doing this, very few of us could name the treaty that binds us. So thank you. Let's sit in awe of all of that. And let's open our gathering with prayer. Let us pray. You invite us to be part of your beloved community, O God. A community that bleeds when people within it bleed and celebrates when people within it celebrates. A community that gathers us on individual spots of land and through remarkable technology that crosses the country and beyond. You gather us to remind us that we are beloved, to ground us in that loving, and to shape our lives by the love that holds us. And so as we reflect on our calling, as we reflect on how to invite others to join that beloved community, come be with us. Come inspire our conversation, deepen our thoughts, move through our questions, and blow your spirit through all that we do this night. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
So I'm going to invite everybody here, I think you already have, to turn off your mics so that we don't interrupt each other. And Taylor, you're not allowed to turn off yours.
Okay.
And let's just sort of kick this off with a sort of quick elevator speech, Taylor. What is this book that you've curated, and where did this come from? What's this about?
Sure. So this book is intended as a resource for new membership classes within the United Church of Canada. And so we wrote it as being suitable for both youth and adult audiences. And although we believe its content would be of interest to all the members of the church, so it would be very suitable for a book study as well within a congregation, but it's primarily written as being that new membership resource.
Well, that's really helpful, and thank you. I should acknowledge that somebody's asked that I would turn on the live transcript, and so I've done that. And if you find it annoying, you can turn off the captions on your own screen. So let me tell you how to do that, and then we'll jump back into the content here. Move your mouse over the Zoom screen so you see all of the menu at the bottom, and look for the three little dots on the word more. Click that, and on the sub menu that pops up, you're looking for hide the subtitle. So if the subtitles are useful to you because it's hard to hear, by all means use them. If you find them distracting or annoying, that's how you turn them off. And it's now in your hands to use as you find most helpful. So yeah, curriculum for confirmation curriculum. Yeah, I get that, but holy cow, this is a long curriculum. Like the confirmation curricula that I've used have been maybe 4 sessions, or I mean, can you get people to come out to 16? Why would you write something so long, Taylor?
Well, that's how the idea of the book started. So I was at a function along with John Young, and this is the time when he was the executive minister for theological leadership. And just during a coffee break, I just mentioned, you know, I've used what's been out there for confirmation, and I just wonder if, you know, the national church would be interested in taking on a project of making something just a little bit beefier. Because I do think there is an appetite for that out there. I said, could we have something that's very similar to, you know, what we always praise in the United Church, the thing we had in the 1960s in the new curriculum? And can we have something that's contributed by the top experts across the church, all writing a chapter on all these various topics? And he said, yeah, that is a great idea, Taylor. Idea for you to write. So he did help me along though, but that's exactly what we've created. And it is longer than a lot of the stuff that's been produced in the last 10 years, but I would say, like, it's still 50 pages shorter than this United Church of ours, which I was discipled into the church with, and so it's ringing in at 150 pages. So I think there's an appetite for, you know, just deeper Christian formation. The people that are seeking faith formation do want something a little heftier, and you know, I think in the church we think we'll scare people off if we put too great of an expectation on it. Well, people listen to 4-hour-long podcasts nowadays. Like, people have a longer attention span than we give them credit. So we did try to make this though to be very accessible, however, like we did, especially around the language, but we did want this to be a very comprehensive resource though.
Yeah, I thought the language was really helpful in that you're avoiding all of the technical terms, all of the theological language. There's no $40 words in this book.
And if we use them, we explain them.
Yeah, no, and that, I mean, as I was reading it, I was thinking not necessarily of the teenagers in my congregation, but of the immigrants in my congregation. The congregation I serve, just so you know, is about 60 or 70% new immigrants to Canada. Lots of them English as a second language. And the folks who are joining my church are not necessarily the the teenagers, they're the adults who've come from a Methodist church in Antigua or United Church of Christ in the Philippines or somewhere else, and they want to get a sense of what it means to be this denomination. And I thought, this is a book that is respectful of their thinking process and respectful of their language abilities, both at the same time. I thought that was a really fine balance to walk.
Well, when we had our contributors meeting, we were very conscious of that. We said, okay, this is not a resource that's strictly for youth. That's not the people that are being confirmed these days. And we have to be very conscious. Is this a book that can be used for new Canadians? So we were very conscious of that in its creation. Another thing I'll say about it as well, like as we wrote it, we didn't want to be very prescriptive about how we say someone has to structure a confirmation class. We did a minister's consultation group, and I'll thank Catherine McLean and Andrew Canati Larenge. They were the ones that were part of that. We came up with all the chapters and contents. But one thing we definitely found out as we were sort of soliciting feedback for this is that ministers do not want to be told how to do a confirmation class, how to conduct it. So we just say, okay, here's the book. You use it how you think is the right way to use it in your congregation. This is what we think is comprehensive, what the essentials of what people need to know, and then you just deliver that in the way you feel is right.
That's so helpful. And Nancy's pointing out on the chat, and I should say, folks, the chat is open. So if you've got questions or thoughts or comments and want to contribute to the conversation, like there's 108 of us in the room right now, so we can't just open the mics, but put your comments in the chat and I'll certainly pick them up. Nancy's reminding us that, of course, preparation in the early church took at least a year.
So you'll find that in the introductory chapter. We'll talk about just faith formation in general. So we talk about what people did in the early church as well in their preparation, and just what faith formation even means for us today. So yeah, I think that's a great point, Nancy, is that that's brought up in the chapter, that we used to expect way more from people that were entering into the church than we do currently. But I think going forward, there's more of an appetite for deeper faith formation.
Sometimes if we offer something for free, people think it's worth what it costs. If they have to work at it, they value it more. Very
much so.
Jane is picking up on the comment about people who were coming into the church mostly from a non-United Church of Canada background, and that's certainly true in my church, whether they're immigrants or whether they're white folks like me who grew up in Canada. A huge percentage of the folks joining my congregation are people who either grew up in a different denomination or in no denomination at all. And I can imagine putting this book into their hands. So let me ask you, as the editor of this book then, because we're kind of exploring your overall vision of this, what do people like that, people from other denominational backgrounds, need to know about the United Church? Like what's our charism? What makes us? What makes us unique and different from the others?
Well, you're right on the money. So we were lucky that we had John Young right from the beginning helping with the formation of this book, because he has the actual statistics. So he knows who are the people that are coming into the church. So it's mostly adults now that are being confirmed. It's not really youth. It's not the bulk of people becoming new members. And then amongst those adults, it's sort of split very evenly into three groups. It's people who were raised within the United Church of Canada. It's people that have no faith background whatsoever. And that's people that have come from other Christian denominations, mostly former Roman Catholics and evangelicals. So we intended to write this book considering that there's all these three groups that are, present within a new membership class.
And what are they looking for? What makes them come to this denomination instead of go to the one that they grew up in?
Right. Well, I think what we would find as well today about people who are joining Christian communities, people can be initially attracted, but things that's really holding people is connection to a tradition.
Hmm.
You know, it's not just that people agree with our stances on social issues and things. You know, we have things beyond that. We have a rich history of worship and of music and prophetic witness and civic engagement. But we can draw a line from the Acts of the Apostles through the traditions of the Western Roman Church onto the Reformation, can go to the social gospel movement and Lydia Grucci in 1988. So yeah, we pride ourselves on our inclusivity, but you know, we're more than that. We're 2,000 years of Christian tradition also.
Well, I think the Anglicans would say the same thing about themselves, though. So there's got to be something a little different about the United Church if people are choosing us. Now, I think, you know, to be fair, a lot of people come into my church not because it's the United Church, but because a friend brought them. And they feel at home because of the community they're part of, rather than because of the thinking in the pews or in the pulpit. So, you know, maybe this is the second thing that draws them rather than the first thing. I don't know.
Very much so. Well, like, this is a very representative book of the United Church. You know, we have contributors that have served in every single province and territory in Canada. We got from Red Bay, Labrador to downtown Toronto, Prince Albert, Saskatchewan, Whitehorse, Yukon. And, you know, as all those contributors were discussing about how to create this book, we kept coming back to the concept of discipleship. You know, a course for new membership has got to be beyond just sort of memorizing the catechism of what is correct beliefs, but about adopting the identity of being a disciple of Jesus Christ. And then, you know, this is not adapted from an American resource. This is a 100% homegrown United Church confirmation book.
One of the things Pat is raising in the chat is appreciating the ability to explore what I think about everything connected to God in the Bible. And I think this book invites that. I think, I mean, author after author after the author is saying, kind of, here's the center of the tradition, or here's 3 different ways to understand this. There's nobody in the book who is saying, if you don't believe this, you aren't Christian. Or, you know, this is what you have to sign up for in order to belong. It really is an invitation to explore and an invitation to go deeper in each chapter, I thought.
Yeah, that's our hope, right? As we said, we don't wish to be too prescriptive about what is the correct way to do things, but just, you know, here is broadly, this is the United Church tradition, and we hope that you feel at home within that tradition and adopt it as part of your identity as well.
So let me back up to a bit of a something you said just a little earlier, as we were talking about how people might use this book. You said you didn't want to prescribe to ministers how they should do that. I got a private note from somebody who I won't name because that was sent privately, saying that's all very well, but some of us are really tired. Is there a leader's guide coming? Or, like, if not, how would you use this? And how can we make it easy for ministers who are tired to use?
I'm going to use this in my congregation in the fall. I'll tell you exactly how I do it. You might say I'm crazy, but I think it's going to be a good way to do it. I'm going to go through all the 16 chapters in 16 separate sessions. I'll do that over the course of probably, you know, 8 or 9 months. So that'd be about every 2 weeks or so I have a session. I'll probably do it after Sunday worship. People can have coffee for a little bit and then say, okay, well, now we'll gather, we'll talk for an hour about this one chapter that we've read. That's what I think is a good thing to do, is not rush it. I say that in the introductory paragraph. To not be anxious about saying, oh gosh, if we make this too onerous, then people are not going to come. I disagree. Like they're not going to come to all 16 sessions. Like people have lives outside of it, and we talked about that as well in the introduction. But read the chapter, and then not just with people that are interested in new membership, bring other people from the congregation into that discussion as well, and just say, well, what's your thoughts on how we, the authority and interpretation of the Bible? What's your experience of that in your time in the church? And then it's not just falling to the minister to, be the one discipling people, but it's the whole congregation that's discipling people as well. So that's personally how I plan on using this book. But as we said, you do as you think is correct in your congregation.
That's really helpful. So let's jump into some of the content, because that's kind of what people are hungry for, I think. Jesus. That wasn't a swear word. It was a topic. You've got one chapter on God and one chapter on the Spirit and two on Jesus. That says to me that Jesus is pretty important to you.
Well, I will respond, not just important to me, because it's not I alone who created the contents of this book. So we had our little consultation group. It was Catherine and Andrew, who I mentioned, and we said, this is the chapters we should have, and these are the contents that should exist in that chapter. Then we recruited all the top experts across the church and say, would you be willing to write this chapter? Flesh all this out that we've mapped out. And so when we came together as contributors, then we said, well, we don't need to have two chapters about Jesus. And we stood firm. We said, yes, we definitely do. So we said, we're going to have one chapter. It's going to be about Jesus of Nazareth, Jesus' life on the earth, the context that he lived in first century Judea. And Andrew took that on as writing that chapter. Then we follow that up with the second chapter. That's Jesus the Christ. So this is sort of our theological understandings about Jesus and Jesus' saving significance for us. And so that was the great Don Schweitzer contributed that chapter. So we were very firm that to be a disciple like this we cannot take for granted that people know the Jesus story. They heard that in church, on a Sunday morning. No, that's a sort of an old way of thinking about faith formation. You should begin with the expectation that people have no grounding in the Christian faith, because we don't receive it by cultural osmosis, as used to be the case in Canadian society decades before.
Yeah, I'm not even sure if we did then, or if we received something so watered down to be almost unrecognizable. But certainly now, people come with all sorts of different understandings of Jesus and what Jesus is for. And I mean, I appreciated that you wrestled with some of the historical questions. I appreciated that you really talked about the theological impact of Jesus. And I think both of those are scratching an itch among people who are trying to figure out whether they want to be part of a church at all.
Mm-hmm.
The questions about the historical Jesus are legion, right? I mean, and the arguments are very much a part of the last 150 years of scholarship. Let me just kind of hold up a couple of them here. One of them that I thought was really interesting that you chose to do was talk about the discrepancies in all the infancy narratives. Now I know Andrew was the author of that. You're the editor, but why the infancy narratives? Weren't you afraid? I mean, Christmas is pretty holy in the secular world. Weren't you afraid of spoiling Christmas for your readers?
Well, I'm going to invite Andrew in. He can offer a response here, if that's all right.
Oh, there you go. Well, Andrew, shall I give you the spotlight? Let me bring you up. Welcome. Are you the Grinch? Oh, we're not hearing you. You're
Let me.
That works. Thank you.
think I'm using defective earphones. Can you hear me well?
Loud and clear now. Thank you.
Thank you. So yeah, I love Christmas, and I will keep on celebrating it even after writing this piece. But really, for me, I do New Testament scholarship, and I really do what is called early Christianity, and it's historical in nature. So Jesus of Nazareth becomes very important for me as a Christian to know that he existed. It's not a creation of imagination. Mm-hmm. So that's very important. It's not somebody sat somewhere and created it. And this is a question actually that I'm trying to bring in the piece that I've written, that the early Christians actually reconstructed the infancy narratives after a number of maybe years or questions have been raised. Like, who is this Jesus you're talking about? What history is guiding us to is that the passion narrative was the key narrative. And then they were challenged, like, could you be fraudulent? And then they realized, oh yeah, we need another story, the infancy narrative. And then they go back searching. And what excites me is that there are two stories, the Lucan story and Matthean story, which are different. Now, that becomes a little confusing for somebody who is looking for history. But that's how history is. It's not a one way. So right in the beginning of the birth of Christianity, we see a church that is not prescribing. It is in a very light way, it's a liberal church. It's a progressive church that is growing right in the beginning, where Matthew is at freedom of recreating the story of the birth of Jesus, and Luke does the same, and they don't collide. And the church continued actually like that up to the time of canonization without any issue, really, with different stories. So for me, historicity becomes important. That is, yes, he existed. We have different stories about him. Yeah. So
what I'm really appreciating about this, and we can't take the whole hour to talk about Christmas, but what I'm appreciating about this is that it is in microcosm what you're trying to do through the whole book. And I'm saying this to you, plural, the two of you, that you're trying to say, here's how thinking liberal modern people can look at these ancient texts and find meaning in them. And we don't have to say this is the newspaper. And we don't have to say that the Christmas pageant that has the wise men show up at the stable is intended to represent history. But just because it's not intended to represent history doesn't mean it has no meaning. In fact, it has deep meaning. And to invite your readers at the beginning of their thinking about Christianity into that kind of reflection on such a pivotal story, I think takes courage and guts. And it's going to scratch where the people itch, I think.
Yes. So yeah, I think that's the whole meaning, really, is that for me, when I read this, the more you read the Gospels, the more you realize that we need to be more progressive, because Mark is very different from Luke, and Luke is different in a different way. One of the stories I preached on recently is Jesus' little quotation that the wisdom shall be justified by its deeds. That is in Luke. And then Matthew says, wisdom shall be justified by her children. Yeah. So it's just a very little line from the Synoptic Gospels. So they are very free in expressing their Christian faith. Yeah. And that's kind of very liberating for me. Just be very free in how you express your Christian faith in Jesus Christ.
It's crucial to me to belong to a church that looks at these texts this way. And I never want to soft pedal this stuff when I'm working with people in my congregation, because I don't want to pretend to a naivety I don't have or that they don't have. but I think sometimes we don't know how to hold together the historical research that's emerged over the last 150 years with the meaning that we find in it. And there's a kind of caricature out there that says if the Bible isn't history, then it's worthless. What you're telling us and what you're inviting your confirmation people to think about is what meaning there is in the Bible and in these stories, even when they clearly contradict each other. And you're doing it with a beloved story. That's pretty gutsy. I think we should go on, Taylor, but thank you, Andrew. I really appreciate your contribution. I loved your chapter, so thank you.
Yeah, and just before I forget,
Yeah.
You had asked me what does it mean for new believers? Yes, it's meaningful, and for new believers, the infancy narratives. Of course, this will go to the section Don Sois as written, the Jesus Christ. Its places, even though yes, you cannot tell exactly why he was born by somebody called Mary. The Gospels agree on that. Mm-hmm. And he and a father figure called Joseph. The two Gospels agree on that. And of course, Mark talks about the brothers and sisters, really brothers that they are mentioning names. So it places this human being in a certain historical setting, and this human being is like us. And for some reason, the early Christians believed that God was revealed in this human being, this specific human being. And in that way, then God can work within our human capabilities, yeah? So that's why it's become very important story for the new believers that yes, it's easy, not easy, it's possible to conceive of a God who is speaking through us.
And I think, without saying anything about any other denomination, I think it is characteristic of ours that we are willing to face those kinds of questions fearlessly. And so the way you've presented it in the book is really helpful. I am going to move on. So thank you, Andrew, because you've done exactly the same thing with the atonement. And you know, could you choose two more controversial questions than the historicity of the infancy narratives and you know, 5 different theories of the atonement? I don't know, but again, they're all floating around out there, right? And a lot of the folks who come into my congregation are so steeped in the blood of Jesus and the substitutionary theory of the atonement and all of the stuff that you see in our Good Friday hymns, that they are totally unaware that there is any other option. And yet here in this one chapter, and really only in a part of the chapter, Don kind of outlines 4 or 5 different theories of the atonement. That must have taken some work to hone that down to about 3 pages and yet make it comprehensive and useful.
Well, Don wrote a great chapter, I thought. All the chapters are fantastic. Don was my theology professor, so I'm going to invoke his voice here. So he would say, you know, we have all these different understandings of atonement because they all serve different purposes. They speak to different, they all cover different sins, I guess we would say, and different ways of understanding that we require salvation. So even something that's very, you know, within the United Church, maybe sort of unpopular today in substitutionary atonement, you know, we would say we still got to have that in the toolkit because, you know, that can be a very powerful way of understanding salvation when we think of something like overcoming addiction. So Don presents all of these to us and speaks about, you know, different scenarios where we understand that this would be an appropriate way to understand atonement and salvation. And they all work at different times individually.
And he never mentions heaven or hell. I mean, every one of the understandings of atonement that he describes is about transformation in this world, which I think is pretty cool. Comment on that, because most of the people coming into my church think the church is all about getting a place in heaven, making friends with St. Peter at that pearly gate.
Right. So while it's in there in ways, especially in Don's chapter, but maybe not with as explicit language as maybe as that. If United Church Publishing House is so gracious to give me a second edition, maybe I'll flesh that out a little bit. But again, that's another reason why we said it's good to do this in the setting of a faith community.
Yeah.
That that someone's going to have a question around that of that nature.
Sure.
And you're like, okay, well, let's talk about that together as a group. So it's broad, it's comprehensive, but it can't touch every single thing. So hopefully that comes out in as you do it together as a group, and you can address that there.
Well, and I was thinking, though, that's also very United Church. We focus our activity and our discipleship on this worldly endeavors. And it doesn't mean that we don't preach resurrection at funerals. I've got 2 people in my congregation right now who are dying, and I'm talking a lot about that with them and their families. But heaven and hell don't come into a lot of my sermons, which is interesting as I ponder it.
Perhaps an area for improvement for our whole.
Yes, sir.
Well, I'd be guilty of it as well.
Interesting, isn't it, as you see ourselves through a mirror like this? Okay, so theology, and there's lots more we could plumb in the book, and we've got 20 minutes left, so I'm not going to. But the other piece in this book, which I thought was kind of cool, was that you didn't stop when the canon closed. I think back to the Middle Ages when I went through confirmation class as a teenager. And yeah, it was a long time ago now. I don't think we talked at all about church history. I think by and large, we talked about Old Testament stuff, New Testament stuff, maybe Council of Chalcedon or Nicaea in terms that a teenager could understand, but then it was fast forward to 1925 and the formation of the United Church, and aren't we great? You've got 2 chapters on church history. That's pretty cool. Tell us why you did that. 3, I'm sorry. You're right.
Yeah, include the United Church history, right? So
sure.
Well, originally when we drew up the sort of the contents, it was just going to be one history chapter. And we wanted all the chapters to be of a consistent length. And so Sandra and I went through it, through the first draft, and, we said, this is too long to be one chapter. Well, you know what? I'm going to make an executive decision here as the editor. This is going to be 2 chapters now. I'm glad we did. It made for a stronger book because, it's about that, as we talked about, identity with a tradition, as we said. But, to be a disciple of the Christian faith, there are some things that people should know. Like they should know that the Christianity was the official religion of the Roman Empire. They should know about the Protestant Reformation and the effects that had. We said, what are the essentials people have to know? And then things that we want to bring us, it's not just, okay, Council of Chalcedon and then United Church Union 1925. We want to say, okay, well, that was great for stuff that happened in Europe and Africa and the Middle East. But then eventually the Christian faith moves to Canada at some point. And we want to talk about how we got from European colonization of North America to the United Church of Canada as well. I think that was when we decided to put that into 2 chapters, that's where we said, okay, let's expand further on that stuff as well.
Sandra, you're here. could you turn on your camera? Would you mind if I brought you up?
Oh, that's good.
I would, let me just find your name so I can spotlight you. Hang on. There's only 112 people here.
Yeah.
Oh, of course you're at the top now because you turned your mic on. I wonder I can't find you. Nice to see you, by the way.
Thank you. Nice to see you both. Thank you. Great to be
You made-
part of this
You
exciting
made
project.
You made a really interesting choice about how to introduce history to these people who don't know anything at all. Like, my high school history classes were full of kings and dates. And you didn't do that. You told us stories about individuals, and not the high and mighty king or thought leader or something, but like, you introduced several women and an Ojibwe leader and a man from South India. Like, this is a very weird way to teach history. What was your thinking about that?
Well, I do think it's important to know some of the thought leaders and the big picture questions, and Taylor mentioned that a little bit, because the rich and the powerful influence the lives of all of us. But of course, it's also, it means that each one of us has to navigate and negotiate the world that is created by some of these people with power and authority. And particularly for people of faith, they have to figure out, they have to navigate their faith world in a very complex way. And and there are some really interesting individuals out there. So I'm not alone as a historian in now thinking about history as being both social history and political and economic history. And the narratives of individuals can really be powerful in showing us how people have figured out faith in their time. And when teaching faith to people in the Christian church, it's important for them to be able to recognize they're not the first person to struggle to figure it out, and to have these, and history isn't some irrelevant thing that happened back there, but they live with a communion of saints, with people from all times in history who can be guides and travelers with us. Some of them really annoy us, but it's important to see who we are as part of a very big story, and our story is significant within that. So I guess that's what prompted it.
Well,
besides, they're just such interesting people.
yeah, exactly. And I mean, the sense I got out of it was that if the faith was that important to them, I need to learn more about this.
Good.
Yeah,
that's right. Yep. And I guess it's also it's modeling the fact that the stories are, because not everybody who I picked up on as a kind of example from each era was a person that was well known in their own time, or accepted or appreciated. Jarena Lee, a freed slave, tireless in her preaching, but probably not known by very many Americans, even in her own context. So it's a reminder that of the voices that we don't always, that we haven't heard and need to pay more attention to.
well, and as the church moves away from the Christendom model, to hear how this way of living has been important to people who weren't interested in lording it over anybody all the way through, I think is a really important signpost to the church that we are becoming, rather than the church that we have been.
Yes, I mean, it's kind of interesting for the United Church because, and you've been talking about it already, we really pride ourselves on our inclusivity, right?
Yeah.
And
well, and I started to wonder whether you were just pulling out tokens, but you aren't.
No, we always prided ourselves on our inclusivity, and now we say, oh my goodness, We weren't inclusive meant that if you were welcome to join my party,
Mhm.
my
Yes.
white Anglo-Saxon Protestant party. And so it's important for us always in the United Church to learn a little, while we never want to lose our inclusivity, such as it is. People that see themselves as marginalized in the United Church wouldn't necessarily say they find us always the church always as inclusive as
Mhm.
some people, some
We would
among
like
us
it to
think
be.
it is, and we would maybe like it to be.
Yeah.
So, so it's a reminder to those of us who are from the majority cultures, to acknowledge that we have missed the stories of others. But it's also a reminder to those who are joining the church or coming into the church from minority, as we call them, or less, not as large numbers cultures, that they have a voice, and it's an important one. And so I hope it opens them to recognize the importance of their voice in the story of discipleship.
Helpful. So helpful. It reminded me of Diana Butler Bass's book, Christianity for the Rest of Us, in the sense that Christianity is shaped by the spiritual experience of the membership, not by the high and mighty. And you just did that again in a very accessible way, really beautifully. So thank you for that.
Oh, thank you.
And I didn't know any of those stories about any of those people. So
Oh.
that was really cool.
Well, that's good.
I should have attended
you
your
do
class,
now.
right?
Yeah, for sure.
Well, thank you. I have
Thank you.
2 more topics I want to touch on and about 12 minutes to go. So I'm going to, we could keep talking, Sandra, but I'm going to thank you and move on, if that's okay. So 2 more things I wanted to talk about. And one of them is about spirituality, because it's become almost a byword, right? That people are spiritual, but not religious these days. You've got a whole chapter on spirituality and spiritual practice. And I mean, kind of reading through that, I mean, clearly you're talking about people being spiritual and religious, not necessarily spiritual, but not religious. But in the midst of all of this thinking stuff, you've got a list of probably 75 spiritual practices. That's a change of pace.
Yeah, that's I love that chapter, because that takes this book from just being a textbook about confirmation to really being a guide for discipleship. And all those spiritual practices, like as you say, it's you've been hit with all the theology and the history and the polity and whatnot. That is the key to building a faith that's going to last a lifetime, about taking on that identity of a disciple. And there's there's such a broad list of things, and suggesting things that people wouldn't, maybe on first glance wouldn't even think, oh, that's a spiritual practice. But then you're like, no, to make food for someone, that's offering hospitality. That's a spiritual practice.
Mm-hmm.
And then like other thing, like Visio Divina, and I'll look at an icon, or like that's not stuff that we traditionally would say about in the United Church. Or maybe I'll be a prayer partner with someone, and we'll hold one another to account for our prayer time. I just think like that's when people read this book, that's going to be a favorite chapter for many people, I believe.
I think that's why you come to church rather than joining a political party, right? You're not just wanting to make a difference in the world, but you're wanting to ground yourself in the numinous, in the spirit, in the divine, and the sacred, and the mystery.
Precisely.
We need to do both. Thank you for that. It was really interesting to see it, and I found myself wanting to go back and take some time to ponder each of those suggested spiritual practices. I mean, I've never seen a list that long before. It was really kind of neat to see all the different things that were included in it. can't talk about the United Church without talking about Indigenous spiritual heritages.
Mm.
That's just become so much a part of who we are, what we're repenting of, but what our growing edge is, what we're learning. What's the best thing about that chapter for you, about Adrian Jacobs' chapter?
Mm. Well, I gotta say from the outset, I'm really glad because we have a nice little profile about Alberta Billy, who sadly just left us
Yes.
just the other day and gone on to glory. I'm glad that we have that in there, very timely for us. But what I think about what that chapter does for us is that, yes, it presents the very, very painful history that the United Church has with, the association Christianity has with the colonizing project that Canada was. But, saying that is not over. The apology has not yet been accepted by the Indigenous Church. But to say, if we look at the events that occurred in 2013, when we adopted the colors of the medicine wheel onto the United Church crest, and that was sort of to symbolize that Indigenous tradition is going to be held to the same understanding of the origins of our denomination as Methodism and Presbyterianism, Congregationalism, and the United Evangelical Brethren. And to say, well, what does that, that is something that is still emerging, to really incorporate that identity into our United Church of Canada. And really, our church was created to be a church for Canada. We cannot have a Canadian church without incorporating that identity. And I think that Adrian, it doesn't get us to an end point, but just begins that pointing us in that direction about incorporating that identity into our whole as the United Church of Canada.
Stan McKay was quoted in Broadview a couple of months ago saying that he thought so far reconciliation between the denomination and Indigenous peoples was mostly located among the leadership, and that we hadn't put enough resources or time or energy into bringing that into the pews. Now, I don't know whether you agree with him or not, and I don't want to debate that issue, but it seems to me that is part of what your book will do. It's going to bring that story to anybody who wants to join the church.
Mm-hmm. As we said about the other history things, to be a disciple within the United Church of Canada, you have to know about Indian residential schools. And you have to know your part in seeking reconciliation from that.
So, last question, and then I'm going to go over to the bookstore rep because people are already asking me how to buy the book. Building God's Beloved Community. It's a potent title. Most of what we've talked about together tonight is sort of my own individual beliefs. What I think, what I trust in, what I hope for, what I wonder about, my path as I try to connect with the spiritual. But it's not just an individual path. So say something about this community aspect of it.
Well, I very truly believe the Holy Spirit was at work as this book was being created, because we said, okay, well, we need this chapter on ecclesiology. So that's our fancy word, theology of the church. I said, well, who are we going to get as a person that's going to write this chapter? And so I was speaking with Haran Kim Craig from Emmanuel College in Toronto, and she said, oh, well, we have this student. She's just graduated with a PhD from post-colonial feminist and migration theology. Oh my God, it's unbelievably so the perfect person to have that. So that was Yoon Jung Kim, and just a great contribution. So I'm going to answer your question, I'm just going to read an excerpt from her chapter because she'll do it better justice than I. So she's talking about relationality. So she talks about the Trinity being a relationship and how that models relationship for us as well. That's okay. So this is from Yunjung's chapter. The church is to be a community of God's people, where we seek to live together in God's relationality and connectivity by making the effort to love, challenge, and support one another. The church is a place to listen to each other's joyful and tearful stories of life, humbly attempting to heal each other's pain day by day. In communal life, Christians can deepen their faith and Christian life, finding their own connection to our loving God. Our faith in God is indeed impossible without love for one another. From faith in God that works through love, and that's a quotation of Galatians 5, verse 6, we become a part of the church, weaving God's amazing stories of love, healing, and hope with others here and now.
Yeah, powerful words. Thank you for that. Thank you for this book. It was really fun to read. It was fun to imagine how I might use it with my congregation and how it might be used all across this vast continent. Different congregations and different gatherings of people all trying to be church together and to reflect on the ministry they're called to, and how to live that out in ordinary lives, like the people that Sandra was writing about. How to take us beyond that Christendom model of church into whatever it is that God has in store for us next. I think this is a resource that will really help people start their journey on the right foot. So very grateful for all of the work that you put into this, and all of the contributors that you cajoled and arm twisted and invited to be a part of this. I hope it serves the church well.
Well, I do want to thank them each by name, if you'll allow me. So
sure, go for
they
it.
do deserve great thanks. So I would like to offer enormous thanks to all the contributors: Susanna Buell, Phyllis Earhart, Sandra Beardsall, Jordan Cantwell, Susan Chisholm, Rob Fennell, Adrian Jacobs, Bill Curvin, Yunjung Kim, Andrew Kanoti Larenge, Andy O'Neill, Gary Patterson, Bill Richards, Don Schweitzer, and John Young. I also want to thank Kate Rod, who is at United Church Publishing House when we pitched the idea of this book, and she was a very enthusiastic supporter of it, as well as Chris, who took over when Kate retired. Catherine McLean, she was on the suggested develop contents group. I'll thank Dee Renault, who gave us our beautiful cover artwork and did the illustrations, which appear in the book, as well as doing all the layout work. And then finally, I really, the most deserving people for praise is Julie McGonigal, who's from Broadview. She was recruited to do the copy editing, and she made all of our academic language accessible. I could not have put this together without Julie, and as well as Kara James, who pulled us over the finish line to meet this deadline. So thank you all the people who helped put this book together. Thank you everyone for tuned in tonight, that you showed an interest in this book. And I hope it serves you well if you choose to use it within your community of faith.
Yes, indeed. Thank you to each of you, and thank you to you, Taylor, too, for the vision, and for the vision that didn't just stop with an idea, but that picked it up and ran with it and nurtured it as it came to birth. So I have brought up my colleague William from the bookstore, because people have been asking how to find the book, and we need to know. William, tell us about that.
So yeah, the book is available now at ucrd.store.ca. It's available in both hard copy as well as ebook. As a book launch promotion, we're offering 20% off the book, both in ebook and softcover, if you use the code BELOVED20 when checking out. The code will end at midnight Pacific tonight, so try and make sure that you get it used. And I am going to post in the chat pretty much everything I just said, in case it's easier to read than listen to me and try and do it. So It's in the chat now, the links for both the soft cover and ebook, as well as the code and when it's going to be used until. Hope everyone enjoys the book, and thanks for coming out tonight. And I have half a minute, so I'm not going to take too much more time. Thank you.
Well, fortunately, we don't go to a commercial break right at the top of the hour, so we can bend the rules just a little bit, but I do think we're drawing to a close. Thank you to each of you who joined in. Once I turn off the recording, we can have a little bit of more informal chit chat, but we did covenant for an hour, and I want to take that seriously. What a fun conversation, Taylor. I really enjoyed chatting with you, and appreciated not only the work that you put into the book, but in working with me and making a warm June evening much more fun. So,
Thank you.
blessings to you all, folks. Have a great summer, and we'll look forward to connecting with you on another webinar. Bye for now.